Welcome to CISO Chair, where true cyber leadership, real stories, and industry insights take center stage. This is your seat at the table.
Did you know that in 2025, the average cost of data breach hit an all time high of 4.45 million globally? That's a stark reminder of how critical cybersecurity leadership has become in safeguarding organizational assets and trust. Hello, I'm Ashish, your host for the CISO Chair podcast, the platform where we deliver and get into the minds of cybersecurity leaders shaping the future of digital resilience. Here we explore strategies, stories, and lessons that define executive security leadership today. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Zach Lewis, a seasoned CISO and a cybersecurity strategist known for his hands on approach to breach response and leadership in high stake environments. You can learn more about Zach's extensive experience and insights at his LinkedIn profile, which I will touch upon by the end of this conversation. Zach, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on. Very excited to be here.
Thank you again. So let's start by diving into your recent experience of leading through high profile breaches and how you have turned those moments into leadership opportunities. And before we kind of jump into it, just wanted to better understand and hear from you. How did you land up in cybersecurity and what was your spark or drive or interest that got you into breach management, so to speak?
So, Zach Lewis. I serve as the CISO and CIO for the University of Health Sciences and Pharmacy. I've been there for about 10 years, and I've been in this role for about 5 years. Got my start in on the IT side in a tech startup right out of college. Kind of worked like desktop support, end user support sort of thing, and became a system admin slowly after that. Left, bounced around from a couple different locations, from co-location facilities to coal companies, and then some got into higher education. And once I got into higher ed, I came in as I'm trying to think, like an engineer, client systems engineer, I believe is what they called it. I kind of designed the packages and the software that got installed on to all of the university machines, did a lot of patching, started getting my first taste of security, but not in the security department at the time. I worked up to network and sys administrator, and then got into management and started managing technical support. Popped around to a couple different universities, and eventually ended up where I am now in this current role. And when I came on board there, I will say that they didn't have much of a security program, if any. So I kind of built the security program for the university kind of from the ground up, and figured out how the team was going to work, the processes, the tools we needed, and just kind of expanded on that. But I mean, how I got into it is there was a need. We didn't have a program, and it felt like it was the right time and something we'd been lagging on. So someone had to do it, right? And it got kind of thrown my direction.
So, would you call that your wake up call, so to speak, when you looked at the tech landscape and maybe the associated risks?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. It was a wake up call in that, again, security wasn't something the university had or was doing in any major regard. So the fact that I had to get in there and start learning about it, I had to read a lot of books, had to take a few certs for what they are worth, and just kind of broaden my horizons, not just on the tech side but on the security side, and learn some new frameworks and how things kind of operate. And found out I just really kind of enjoyed it. People always talk about passion in cybersecurity, but I mean, I just thought it was fun. I enjoyed doing it. The learning process around it, and it almost became sort of like a gamification or a game where I got to keep the bad guys out. I got to make sure we're secure. Like, let's counter them this way. Let's counter them this way, and just kind of work through it. So, it's kind of what I enjoy doing, and it just kind of added on to my everyday enjoyability of work.
Thanks for that. And I actually want the audience to hear it from you about the book that you're planning to launch early next year. But before even getting into that, I'm just curious to know what inspired you to write that, and what all went into writing that book in terms of experiences, knowledge, challenges, or inspirations.
Sure. So, the book's title is called Locked Up. And I wrote this book as almost like a first person perspective, sort of a case study of a real world ransomware incident. So we had an instance where we were engaged with Lockbit. And they were the most prolific threat actor group in 2022, 2023. Recently starting to make some headway again after being taken down by the FBI a year ago. So we were kind of tangling with them in a ransomware incident. And what I found is, I kind of kept notes on everything that happened throughout the incident, who we worked with, decisions that were made, things that got remediated after the fact. But I turned that all into a presentation. I was taking it to conferences and giving it as it's just a quick, 20, 30, 40 minute presentation about what happened. And I was getting a lot of questions from the viewers on that and everyone in attendance. And it kept happening conference after conference, and people just had tons of questions. So I thought, there maybe be something to this. So I started writing a few chapters, and I pitched it to Wiley, the book publisher. And they were like, man, there's nothing like this kind of on shelves. We think this would be a great book. And they really wanted to sign it out of the gate. So we put a deal together, and that book's going to drop in January now, but January 6th. And my hope is that practitioners, higher education leaders, or really leaders of companies in general, because ransomware affects us all, and it's a growing threat every year. It increases in breaches that happen each year from that. So I want users to be able to take this book, readers to take this book and just read through it, see the decisions we made, why we made them, on some of the roadblocks we ran into, problems that happened, and just give them an idea of what to expect, what to think through, what to work through, and maybe they can update their incident response plans. Maybe they can update their leadership team and not have some of those things that happen to us not happen to them. And just get through it a little bit easier. Nothing's going to be cookie cutter, but at least give them an idea of what to expect.
Well, firstly, I would like to laud the effort, the initiative. This is, I think, going to be a great contribution to the community, a great learning resource for anyone who has either seen it firsthand to more reflect, or maybe someone who's more curious to know about a little more intricately. More about it, a little more intricately. But I also want to take this opportunity to also touch upon the human side of it. Maybe if you could touch upon what really went through, and maybe for the listeners, if you could quickly take a step back and tell them what this logbit was about, and what happened in that situation, what was your first reaction. I mean, I'm not going to ask you if you paid the ransomware or not, but just the human side of it, if you don't mind.
Sure. So Lockbit came in. So let's start with higher education. Education in general is typically like a number 2 or number 3 industry that's attacked each year by threat actor groups, depending on what case or study you're looking at. So it's highly targeted regardless. And the reason is for that is typically universities don't have a lot of funds in cybersecurity, very low budgets, but there's a lot of information there. There's student data, and getting young people's social security numbers, or identities essentially to masquerade at is very important. They're very valuable. We have research data. We are research institutions. A lot of proprietary IP research kind of happening there that threat actors might want to get. We have financial data. We have health data because we're a health sciences university. So we kind of have a little bit of everything in it. So all this data is ripe for the taking. Budgets are kind of low. We might not always have the best practitioner. We don't pay high dollars for people to work there, right? So you're not like getting the best of the best. Not saying my team's not good. My team's great and I love them, but you have limits on what you're able to do with those dollars. So just a lot of factors there that play into that. But Lockbit came in during the time when the VMware hacks of 2023 were very big. So a lot of threat actors were compromising the hypervisor or the root of where all your servers ran. So at that level, things like a Sentinel-1, a CrowdStrike, your EDRs can't really detect ransomware. So there's not a lot of security there. And once that gets encrypted, your other servers can't run. So they kind of came in and took out our virtual environment. From a human level, it's not a good feeling. When you finally find that ransom note sitting on your server saying like, hey, you've been encrypted. You got to come to this dark website and chat with us on how much it's going to cost. And I just remember seeing that, and at first we'd have thought we'd had a hardware failure. This was a technical problem, and we'd been working through it until we found that ransom note a couple days into the attack. It's a gut punch. You feel it inside of you. You feel sort of the dread of it because it's going to be a really long, hard road to get out of this situation. And then when you see they're talking about how much data they have, and ours fluctuated throughout the course of the attack, where they started at, I think it was like 65, 70 gigs of your data we have. And then it was, we have 160 gigs or we have 300 gigs, and their number kept changing for pressure tactics and such. But seeing that and then being like, oh, we want $1.5 million, you're like, $1.5 million, and they got all this data. Like, I'm probably going to lose my job. I remember I made 3 phone calls the first day when we saw it. The first was to our cyber insurance provider, and I said, hey, we had a ransomware attack and we need some help. And then we called FBI, and I said, hey, FBI, we've had a ransomware attack. I'm going to need some help. And I called my wife and I said, "Hey, there's been a ransomware attack. This could be a resume generating event. You might want to just hang out there. I may be looking for a new gig here soon." So definitely a concern there. Outside of like my my personal human, effects of it, you got to think about the team. Team's under a lot of stress as they're slowly being brought in to this ransomware attack, and how we have to recover, and pressures put on them to do certain tasks in a short amount of time. And then you have your end users that have no idea of what's going on until you finally get around to telling them. And that's a decision point, like we talk about in the book, is when do you let the end users know, our students, our faculty, our staff, alumni, researchers, all these different people, that, hey, we've lost your data. And skipping to the end, we didn't lose hardly anything, and we didn't pay the ransom. I will jump out and say we did not pay the ransom, but it's a journey. A lot of people have a lot of emotions, but at the same time, these things happen, and they happen a lot. A lot of companies are experiencing it. I think a lot of people get credit monitoring mailed to them each year. They're told about data breaches, and it's almost become a way of life, and that's rather unfortunate, really.
Resume transforming event, and I'm sure it was, I mean, and not even on lighter note, but did you consider at that time, like, quite literally pulling the plugs?
So, I mean, we pulled network connectivity for some machines to make sure that they couldn't talk out and things still were happening. We want to make sure we contain the event, and you can't recover until you've rooted out the bad guys, and then also closed up how they got in. So those first few days were a lot of conversation with outside counsel, and we brought in forensics teams and threat negotiators. So, we're running the negotiation side, we're running the remediation side, trying to figure out what happened with forensics, but then also standing up a new environment. So there's so many different pieces going on, and you don't always want to be there for it, but but you kind of got to work through it. It's your job, right? And just hope at the end they still want to keep you around.
I'm also curious to know how easy or difficult was it for you to work closely with FBI, and I'm sure you have to open a lot of things, when you reach out to any such government body, so to speak. But how easy, how difficult, how intimidating, how hard was it, or not, maybe?
So I had reached out to our local FBI office years in advance, and I actually talk about this in the book, and I recommend it to most practitioners, is to reach out to your local law enforcement bodies, and whether that's local law enforcement, FBI, CISA. We have CISA in the United States as well. There's a lot of different agencies, obviously, across the world that investigate cyber crimes. Whatever big city you're in, you probably have a local office. Reach out to them, introduce yourself, let them know about your industry. There's a lot of groups you can be involved in. So here in the States, we have a group called InfraGard. It's a national organization with chapters in all the major cities. But we work very closely with the FBI on knowledge sharing and information sharing about different sorts of threats and attacks we see going on. So I knew our FBI agents in our local office fairly well. I know the cyber team there. So reaching out to them, like, hey, this is a big deal. I got something going on. They're like, oh, Zach's calling. Let's make sure we get some resources to him. During that time, I'd also reached out to CISA, which is the cybersecurity arm that kind of deals with attacks like this. Again, I've reached out to them in the past. I had contacts there. So they were kind of standing by if I needed them. The FBI really wanted to get data on what was happening. So they wanted to know, Bitcoin wallets. They want to know, are you paying? Are you not paying? How is the negotiation going? What's the threat actor's ransomware note look like? So all this different information that they were using to build a case, they're not going to come in and put hands on keyboard and try to like hack back or anything like that, but they're actively building a case. And it was probably less than a year after our attack where the FBI actually managed to capture the Lockbit domain, their website. They indicted a bunch of the creators of it and users of it. And I like to think that the information that we provided during our attack actually helped with that case. It might not have been the breakthrough they needed, but it actually helped build that case for them to take down Lockbit, which is pretty awesome.
That's awesome, is all I can say. But now, without any spoilers, what's the most unexpected leadership lesson a reader might find in your book?
I talk a lot about being calm. I'm sort of a practitioner, where maybe a poor practitioner of stoicism. I'm very much in mind of being able to stay calm and sort of not hide emotions, but master them in those times of high stress. So when you're in a ransomware incident and decisions are having to be made very quickly, and you're likely short on sleep and very stressed, you got to be able to stay calm, kind of put that stuff out of your mind and make decisions. Because I think what's important for your team is to see someone who actually knows what they're doing, right? Like they got that leadership they need. You're in this role for a reason. So as a CISO or a CIO or whatever you are in your company, like, you need to be that leader, guide your team through it. If they feel confident that you have a handle on things, then they're going to respond better. They're going to perform better. And that might be as easy as you, the CISO, having an incident response plan that has a bunch of those early questions just sort of answered, like, who do I call first? What do I do after that? What's that phone number? Like, just having all that stuff in a document that you don't have to think about during an incident. You can just look at that paper and read it and be like, yep, that's what I got to do. Yep, that's got, and then do it. Makes it a lot easier to get through those early stages and give off that aura of confidence and control, which I think is important.
Yeah, because you mentioned stoicism, this something called as dichotomy of control, where it is about focusing on what is within your control, and obviously staying calm in such kind of situation is not just required but mandatory.
Yeah.
With that said, I am a little also curious to know what event or what test or what activity that you did at your end confirmed that okay, this was more than that.
Yeah, so we had a lot of equipment that was sort of end of life that we had actually planned to replace within about a month out from when the attack happened. We had plans to replace this hardware. So we knew it was end of life, out of warranty, needing to be replaced, and just the way budgets line up and coming out of COVID, there were supply chain issues. So things were taking longer than usual to arrive. Kind of a perfect storm of events where money's tight, stuff's taking a long time to arrive, things are expiring out of warranty. So we thought, man, the equipment had shut down and stopped functioning, and our internal sites were down. So we thought, man, when they say end of life, they really mean end of life. Like, this stuff is dead. So we came in from a tech mindset of, hey, we got to stand things back up and get it back on. So we're trying to reboot. We're looking at the imaging. We're looking at partitioning. I'm trying to figure out what happened. And we actually do manage to get things back up for a very short time before they come crashing back down. And that's kind of when the ransomware actually was going through and systematically encrypting different system files on the back end of that hypervisor. Once those got encrypted, they couldn't be read anymore. And that's what brought everything down. And from there is where we found the ransomware note in the root of that hypervisor. And, we didn't think at the time that we had been attacked until we found that note. And we were just banging our heads against the wall trying to get this hardware back working. But when you see that note, and there's no way you put it there. There's only a few people that have access to the hypervisor, so it's serious when you find that sort of note there, and you're having these issues, and it changes your entire mindset. So you have to move immediately out of disaster recovery, business continuity mode into incident response mode. So we stop troubleshooting immediately. No more reboots. No more touching the systems. You don't want to damage that forensics evidence that could be there, that digital footprint, if you will. So we stopped immediately. Got out the incident response plan, which kind of detailed again who we're supposed to contact. Let the leadership team know. Kind of let some of the key board members know. But yeah, your entire perspective of what you're doing changes. And I was with a couple of my team members who found it too, and I'm like having them look at it. I'm like, this is bad news, right? And they're like, yeah, this looks like bad news. And I was like, all right, I'm just not imagining it. Like, all right, it's go time.
Maybe from your experience, not just for this particular case, but in general, also out of your opinion, how do you keep leadership engaged without triggering unwanted fear when the story gets tough?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd always been one who shares information with the board. I try to present to them on a quarterly basis, if not more. And that usually consists of where we are from a security standpoint. Keep in mind, I'm building this program right from scratch while this is happening. And what was what was super helpful with our board was actually one of the members is a CIO for a large pharmacy chain. So having someone who at least understands the security aspect and some of the stuff I'm talking about is really good. So if you have someone like that on your board, having a meeting with him before going in front of the full board is important. And you guys just talk, because you can actually talk tech with someone like this who has a technical background on your. If you have a CISO or a CIO on your board, they're going to understand the things you're talking about, so you can kind of get in the weeds a little bit. And then when you get in front of the full board and you're explaining things from a 10,000-foot view, you don't want to get in the weeds with them and talk tech, but he can back you up on some of that. Be like, oh yeah, I've heard about this. This happens here, or hey, we dealt with this, or whatever. Getting a little bit of backup from a board member really helps. Another thing to think about with ransomware is that your board members really are likely executives at other companies, right? They work their own jobs, and those companies have probably had ransomware attacks. Just statistically, on the how often ransomware happens, they've probably been through one of these, or at least gotten a data breach letter in the mail So they're going to be familiar with this. And I think it's important to keep letting them know. And I keep educating even to this day that these attacks happen. Education is a big target. We have a plan to get through this. We have resources available to get through this. Like, we just have to work it. This is part of, again, part of business, which is unfortunate, but kind of just what you have to do when you navigate through it. That's why they have a CISO to do this job.
Thanks for that. And I'm also not sure. Did you get a chance to really negotiate or speak with the bad actors, the ransomware attackers?
Yeah, so the threat actors have a dark web site. It's like a forum, it's a chat site in the ransom note. You navigate there on the dark web to talk to them, and they offer great customer support. As some people find it hard to imagine, but these companies, these threat actors operate like real companies. They have their own tech support teams, they have customer support teams, they have, if you decide you want to pay the ransom, they will assign people to help you unencrypt your data. Like, they want this to be a transactional business, because if they're not delivering and they're not, giving you keys or help when you go to pay, then people are going to stop paying them, and they want that money to keep coming in. So they're running it like a real business, which is crazy. But yeah, you can open up the chat site and you can talk directly with Lockbit. You put in your case number, you have an ID. You're like, this is who I am. And they're like, oh, hey, we have this much data. This is how much it's going to cost. And you're like, I can't pay that, or I need some proof of what files you have. So at the beginning, it was a lot of conversations around getting that evidence that they actually have our files. So what sort of file names do you have? So we would get a list and be like, I don't know, that list doesn't seem very impressive. Like, there's not a lot of names on there that look like sensitive information files. What else do you have? And you're just trying to figure out how much they have. And they know this, and they're going to give you a little information, maybe not all of it, maybe bluff a little bit too, but just enough to get you interested to want to pay that ransom. And whether that's the full amount or partial amount, they're probably going to be happy with whatever they can get if that's the direction you want to go. Not advocating to pay the ransom at all. Not for that, but could be a business decision that's different.
So thanks for that. And it is pretty crazy, right? Like when you mentioned that they work like enterprises. But if I again, so FBI also does not recommend paying the ransomwares, of course. But what should the organizations do in situations like these where sometimes there is no option other than paying, just to get the data back? Do you just declare it to the authorities, the regulatories, or any other alternative that you may have on your mind?
Yes. Again, paying or not paying is a business decision. At the end of the day, it's not the decision of the CISO, which is important for, us as CISOs to remember. It's not our call. It's the call of the business.
Sorry, I'm interrupting for a second, but is there any legality to paying or not paying?
Not yet. There have been some laws that have been proposed that are going through about whether or not you might make it illegal for companies or public companies to pay. I'm pretty sure the governmental bodies aren't allowed to pay, but nothing that prevents a private company from paying or anything like that yet. But we could see that change in the future. There was a lot of talk about that a couple years back, but it doesn't look like it has any ground right now. So we'll see.
Thank you for that. And sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to kind of quickly clarify on that. But with that said, do you have a blueprint of sorts on mind for moving a legacy institution down a secure digital road, and all the more with your experience?
Yeah, so our big push, even up to when the ransomware attack happened, was come very cloud first. So we have been, since I came on board, have been migrating most of our environment out to SaaS platforms and cloud platforms, which I think ultimately at the end of the day probably saved us during the ransomware attack. It allowed us to keep operating. So we didn't actually have to close our doors or stop teaching classes during the incident. Most of the environment that was down were internal backend systems that we were trying to recover. The way the students learn or get taught, or how professors go in and teach their courses, like all these systems were all cloud-based in different SaaS platforms. And that in of itself is segmentation. So all these things were segmented from where the actual ransomware hit. So the majority of our applications and software was able to keep running, and people were able to keep operating while we were on the back end scrambling to fix some of those back end services. I do think that, a digital transformation, a big proponent of cloud if you can do it, but that stuff in our instance absolutely helped us stay afloat.
A tricky question of sorts again. In your opinion, should CISOs be legally liable for a breach if evidence shows proactive but unheeded warnings?
So there's been a lot of talk around that lately, right? And I think if you're a CISO who is doing, their best to secure an organization and protect an organization, and you've documented your reasoning why you're doing these things, I think you're fine. Even if there's a breach, you're probably fine. It's when you do questionable things, and whether that's, secretly pay ransom groups out of different, buckets of money, or you try to hide if your customer data has been breached. I think those are grounds where people are being charged, and it's a legality line. So if you're not breaking the law, I don't think that you're going to be charged with anything. Now, a lot of my peers will say you need to have D&O insurance, which is director and officer insurance, as most chiefs, officers in a company will have. So it's good to verify that. I'm not going to say that's bad to have. I would verify it if you're in a company like that. And that gives you a little bit of protection, but just don't break the law. And if your leadership doesn't want to do a security thing that you've suggested we need to do to mitigate a risk or something like that, just have it documented, whether that's in minutes or in an email or something. So when that comes back and you're like, hey, I said we should have done this, you guys wanted to accept the risk. There's nothing wrong with that, but I'm going to have that trail detailed about why it was made and when it was made, so we can go back and see that in the minutes, so everyone knows that it wasn't something I dropped the ball on, right?
So I'm also curious to know, how do these institutions, especially universities, academic institutions, how do they look at certifications in general?
So we're not an ISO shop, but in terms of compliance frameworks, I mean, compliance is your minimum baseline, right? It's like the minimum that you have to do to get certified. That's not saying that's all you should do. You should absolutely build on that. That is the minimum standard that you could do to be acceptable, right? So don't stop there. Try to build on top of that. We're not an ISO shop, but we have other regulatory and frameworks that we have to follow. So we have things called like FERPA, which protects student grade and course and academic records. We have things like HIPAA with healthcare. We have PCI for taking payments, and then in terms of like frameworks, not really compliance regulations, but frameworks, we follow the CIS critical controls. So we try to match what we have to do on these regulations and make sure we're good there, and then we build on top of that with our CIS critical controls, and we try to check things off of that list every year, and do different projects. So that's how the program's sort of built and what we structure around. And then from there, we look at risks to the university through an enterprise risk committee. Is there anything that IT or security can do to kind of mitigate those or help in those areas? And then we just build on top of our program from that point.
I think that makes complete sense. More framework kind of an approach. But that also brings me to another tricky question around certifications. In your opinion, do you think certifications have outlived their practical value in the real industry?
I am very bearish on certifications. I'm not a huge fan of them. I did many certifications when I was just learning security and going through all of them, from a foundational one like Security Plus all the way up to a CISM and a CISSP and a CRISC. All these, all your alphabet soup of certifications. I probably had 12, 15 of them at a time. But I don't know. I think it's weird that you base practical knowledge, applicable knowledge off of a multiple choice test, right? It's hard to get a good feel. Like, you can go in and memorize test questions and definitions and things like that, but actually applying these skills is harder to manage. And I just, it's not something you can do with multiple choice testing. It's kind of weird. So I don't put a ton of stock in it. I don't put a lot of hard requirements around them. I know a lot of companies still require you to have things like a CISSP or a CISSM. So I maintain mine in the event that I ever need it. But I mean, outside of that, I don't put much stock in it.
Quick pivot of sorts. What are your thoughts on offensive defense, and where do you draw the line? Where actively disrupting.
So with cyber attacks, attribution is always difficult. It's hard to attribute who the attackers are. An interesting In the book The Cyber Crisis, written by Dr. Eric Cole, he actually makes a point of talking about how governments were analyzing where cyber attacks come from in the United States. They were seeing a whole lot of attacks coming from China, and a whole lot of attacks coming from North Korea, and a whole lot coming from Russia, but they weren't seeing a bunch from Iran. And they were like, that's weird. Why are there no attacks from Iran? They're really low. We couldn't figure it out. And after some more digging through weeks and weeks of work, they actually found out that Iran had hacked Chinese servers and were using those servers to launch attacks on the US. So it looked like they were coming from China, but they were actually Iranian threat actors. So again, back to attribution, you think someone from Russia is hacking you and you go after them, but it's not actually like the Russians. It's somebody else. And I would not advise ever counterattacking a nation state. That's probably not a good idea. But I'm just saying, using that as an example to show that it's hard to verify sometimes who it is who's actually attacking us. So you'd be very careful there, because you could get into a legal trap where you've now hacked someone who had nothing to do with your attack, and now you're the attacker, and you're going to have some legal problems. So offensive defense is very difficult, and I would not recommend it unless you were your own nation state, and that's kind of the gig you were in. So be careful with that. I guess is my best advice.
So I just wanted to quickly touch upon your human side. How has your homesteading or off-grid life influenced your tech leadership and experiences in general?
Yeah, so I live outside of St. Louis, Missouri, kind of far out into the country area, out away from the city. And there I have a little homestead where I raise chickens, and we do a lot of gardening and try to do a lot of self-sustainability and how we manage and live our lives with my family and I. Think about that. I've been asked this question a couple different times about how like cybersecurity applies to homesteading and different stuff like that. And I think one of my favorite things about there's a couple stuff, when you grow your own food and you have chickens and you're maintaining this stuff, it gives you an alternative food source that you can bring in. And, not that I'm some sort of prepper and I think the end of the world is coming, but I like to have options. I like to have a plan B if a snowstorm comes or a tornado hits or something, and we have a natural disaster and I can't leave the house for, a week or 2 weeks, or services are unavailable. I want to make sure that my family is still getting fed and taken care of. So we have alternative food sources. We have a plan B. It's resilience, just what we do in cybersecurity. We try to make our systems resilient to attack or to a hardship or a problem. We want to make sure we can keep operating. So I kind of take that mindset to the homestead. And then, there's little things like when I raise chickens, so I have a fence around them, and then that fence has motion lights on the outside, and I have dogs that would alert me if there was an attack, and there's automatic doors, and it's almost like the eggs are my critical data, and I'm protecting them behind a chicken coop and a fence and motion lights, and the stuff's like your EDR and your IDPs and all these different alerting systems you have. So you start building that defense in depth mindset in with this stuff, and you start applying it in your day to day everywhere, just because you've gotten so used to it. So there's always parallels there from the homestead that I can bring back to cybersecurity, which is kind of funny.
So also wanted to quickly touch upon how do you think, life outside pursuing something other than just security is important for security technology leaders in general for wellness? And do you think wellness is a concern in more recent times with a lot going on the technology front?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen the data coming out of that showing that burnout amongst CISOs and cybersecurity practitioners is at an all-time high. Interesting correlation between its growth in burnout and the growth in ransomware attacks. Maybe there's something going on there where there's a lot more attacks and we have a lot more stress. But getting a hobby outside of security IT is very important, right? I don't think anyone's going to deny that. I mean, I think for me, it's the homesteading stuff. I read a lot, but I do really enjoy the security and IT side. So even if I'm reading, it might be a cybersecurity book. It could be a business book. It likely ties back to my work in some way, but I don't always fully attach completely, which might be a problem, but we'll work through. I mean, find anything to do, whether it's board games or movies or reading or something. You got to break away from the grind every now and then and get a little closure. Take a couple days off if you need to. I think people need to be very mindful of their work-life balance. And I mean, we're always being attacked. We're constantly getting questions. We're getting phishing emails and text messages that look questionable, and there's all these different scams running all the time. So it's hard to fully let your guard down in such a technologically oriented world. I don't know. Get out in nature, take a walk, just whatever you do to clear your mind. I think having a good mindfulness practice is important.
Thank you so much, Zach, for that. So with that said, I think we have approached the last section of this podcast, which is the signature rapid fire round. Couple of quick questions coming your way.
Okay.
Starting with, in your opinion, zero trust, is it a necessary standard or was it just more of a marketing hype?
There was definitely a lot of marketing hype around it. That was all the rage pre AI. there's definitely great things to do with Zero Trust. There are pieces of it that are fantastic. Some of it's hard to do, and it's a journey that never ends. So read through it and implement what you can and keep building towards it. But definitely marketed hype there for a long time.
I cannot believe we talked or rather touched upon AI only towards the last part of the segment. It's the first
Did it.
time
That's
I'm
a
having.
good. That's like an accomplishment.
I mean, it is a refreshing change, but now I'm also feeling guilty about it.
Yeah.
In some sense. Okay. Next question is, what's your favorite security tool right now?
I mean, I'm real bullish on the enterprise browser space. I think Island has a pretty awesome product out there. I got a really good DSPM, data security posture management tool. Concentric AI is pretty good. Those are a couple of my big ones right now. They're pretty awesome.
And how do you stay abreast? How do you keep up with the evolving technologies, trends, and so much happening around not just cybersecurity but technology in general?
I get an email every day about attacks and changes in the cybersecurity landscape. So any new major attacks, any new legal laws coming into play, any just news in general. I do get an email, a couple different emails every day from that. Handful of subreddits on Reddit. You seem to get a bunch of good information there. Just kind of watching. I don't watch a lot of the news, but if it deals with maybe the Department of Education or with CISA or different sort of cybersecurity practices, I'll kind of tune into that just to see what's going on there. I stay pretty abreast of supply chain stuff with parts for computers and AI and chips and how all that works, because that's pretty indicative of where the market's going. But and I read a lot. I read a whole lot of stuff all the time.
And what part of evolution and AI in general, what's happening around, what part of it is something that you do not like or you do not foresee taking good shape?
So I will say I am very bullish on AI and where it's going to go. I think right now people are leaning into it extremely hard, and they're going to go too far past the line and have to pull back and bring in some more people again. There's a lot of failed AI initiatives out there. So I think as that gets a more realistic output of where we are currently, I think we're just a little early. Companies are a little early on that, and where they might have been able to outsource a lot of work to AI the next 10 years. They're trying to do it now. I think right now the market is just very weird and trying to adjust around these fast changing AI landscape. And I mean, there seems to be a new model or a new change or something big every couple months now, and we just aren't getting enough time to adjust and adapt to it. That's probably the biggest issue right now. We'll see how it turns out in the next few months.
Thank you so much, Zach, for this candid conversation, for all your inputs, your perspectives, and for sharing your experiences with the bigger audience here. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate you again on your new book. And maybe if you could tell the listeners on where and how they can follow you and your work, I think now could be a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. I think I'll give the link to Ashish if he doesn't have it already, and we'll drop it in the show notes along with some links for the book. You'll be able to get that. It's available right now for pre-order on Amazon and Books A Million and Barnes & Noble and all the major book detailers probably out in the world. All the websites. There'll be an audio book dropping at the same time, and that will be available for release on January 6th. So get ordered now and get some pre-order incentives if you order and hop over to my website, which I'll also hand to Ashish there. He put it up. We got some pre-order incentives for you if you want to get on all that. So check it out.
Thanks a lot, Zach, and I wish you all the very best with your not just your book but in general. Any last closing word before we wrap up today's conversation?
No, just I want to thank you for the time and having me on, and I just encourage our listeners to have a good rest of their year as they ride out the rest of the new year, and remember to focus on your mindfulness and take care of you. And if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much once again, Zach. Was a pleasure having you here, and I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. You too.
Thanks for joining CISO Chair. Subscribe for global perspectives and bold conversations on cybersecurity. Stay secure, stay inspired. See you in the next episode.